Welcome to the Chess Channel, the channel where you can learn loads.
In our last video, we made a promise and now we are going to stick to it. The top chess engine championship is by a clear mile, the strongest and most sophisticated chess tournament on the planet. As you might know, Season 24 has just ended. The two superfinalist engines Stockfish and LCZero had produced some magnificent games, and though we would not have time to cover much today, what we want to say is how amazing it is to just be able to sit back and enjoy the magic of chess. In the 100 games contested, any idea how many decisive results have been noticed for the engine taking the black pieces? This bit of statistic is significant because it fits in with what has happened in the past. The answer is none. No engine with the black pieces was able to win a single game. Many openings we saw were biased, and depending on what opening was selected, this had a spiral effect on how the game ended. With this in mind, we are going straight into action. The selected game today is the superfinal game of round 10. This has been the shortest game in this superfinal, and using the opening used was the perk in the Austrian. Believe it or not, Stockfish had detected a mate in 93 plies. Let's see what happened in this game of round 10. A 6-book opening sequence was used in this game. With Stockfish taking the white pieces, an e4 move started up the game. d6 appears. And with d4 and now knight f6, what you see here is the perk. Knight c3 led to the opening in the kingside diagonal. And with now a straight f4, Leela preps this bishop. This opening sequence ends with this knight move, castles, and after bishop d2 and this opening on the queen side. What we basically witnessed is a 6-move opening book. There are many historical games to look at, using this specific opening, but we are not going to make any references today. The Austrian defense is also known as the Yugoslav defense. Both engines at the point in time give Stockfish a slight edge, but is it going to be enough to determine the outcome of the game? Bishop d3 resulted to the bishop move. And here is where the party is about to get started. Stockfish opted for this queen move. Queen e2 frees up the first and allows the engine to decide what side to castle. In addition, it strengthens the center, does it not? If queen e2 looked a bit out of place, what do you make of this push to the fifth? It aims to open up the chessboard. If you check this position on your own software using your latest Stockfish version, the engine at different depths will give you different evaluations. Moving on, Stockfish advanced this pawn, and what is happening is that this bishop now on b7 looks out of play. For the time being he is, but is this position robust and can Leela get back into the game? A key move or square to look out for is this one on b5. With Leela making sure he sealed the access to b5 in this way. Stockfish in turn shoots off with this pawn. There is no immediate urge to rush things. With the superfinal timings set at 120 minutes and 12 seconds per move, both engines have too much time to calculate different and very deep calculations. Rook e8 resulted to this knight jump, but how similar is this move to that of how Ding Liren played it in his championship match against Nepo? If the idea is to chase after the knight, well, let's see. Leela did not want to see this knight being parked on g5, and she calculated best to attack him. Retreating this knight to safety would imply a waste of tempo. For example, if the knight backs off, has Leela now weakened up her kingside, and could this pose a problem? This unfortunately will be a question to address another time. Coming back to this game, as soon as this knight came under fire, Stockfish was calculating an entirely different line. The mighty Stockfish has a knight under attack, and yet the engine is not going to move this knight out. In a fascinating fashion, Stockfish reciprocates the attack on this knight, and many things can happen here. What happens if this knight finds the rim? Find the next best move and you will pay a very dear price. Check this out. If you were in an advantageous mood, is this hit on f7 going to work, and if now, can you tell why? Should the knight came off, after this queen invasion materializes, though Leela would be a full knight up, her position really sucks. King g8 to avoid disaster is not going to do much. Can you see why? Sneak in with this check, and when the king finds the corner, how would you move further? Though this now looks easy, you can easily get done. If you do get rid of this pawn to earn the knight, you might not ever get there in the end. Once the queen comes under fire in this way, this queen repositioning might even end the game. As soon as the rook chases after her in this way, this queen will need to drop and the game will be as good as over. The best you can do is to take, and Stockfish will have nothing left to play. However, if we return to this part in the game, this pawn on g6 will need to be removed by the queen, and because there is a mate lurking in just one move, this knight on h5 does not have the luxury to do anything. King g8, which is forced, will now drop the knight and Leela bites the dust. Coming back to the actual game, Leela was very much capable of working out the ins and outs of the variation, and to just avoid this line, he went along with the best line of play. She got rid of the knight. And if you think you have seen it all, well, you will never see enough in this type of championship. Each and every game has its own little meaning, depth and significance. Any ideas how Stockfish proceeded? Should this knight be eliminated? Once you capture in this way, there is this bishop blockade, but as soon as this bishop comes under fire, once you get the king to safety, when this bishop drops too, this would be a big blow to deal with. So, returning to this very game, as soon as this knight on g5 disappeared, any ideas how Stockfish handles this very position? This was that move, and is this game a beauty? There are a number of ways you can do it here. Leela saw this pawn on being exposed and was calculating deeply if it was feasible to take him. If you take with the knight, when this takes with a check kicks in, taking this pawn, which is a must, can lead to further complications. If you hand over your bishop with a check, this would be the idea here. Take, and should this knight now drop, this queen check will pick up the bishop and the game for Leela will be lost. However, if you leave this knight be and not bother him, there is another more impressive move. Go for him in this way, and again, the continuation will be very difficult. Even if you squeeze in this check, King f7, and now this position is more tricky than it looks. You cannot have the queen and king on the same file, but even with this position, retreating the knight to safety is not going to cut it. Take on f4 in this way, and the only way out would be to castle. If we just stop to evaluate here, Leela would be way in front, and there is no way Stockfish would be able to catch up. Not only Stockfish would be lucking behind in pieces, but the position for the number one engine stinks to say the least. However, if we return to this position on the board, when the pawn comes off on f7, and this would have been on move 14, if you take the knight, after the knight comes under fire, should you back him off here? Any ideas what is best to try? Has anyone discovered this knight jump? Knight c6 with the aim to sneak into d4 to chase after the queen will be met by this queen repositioning, and Leela would be one step too short. The knight on c6 is basically paralyzed because if you move him out of this outpost, the bishop would fall. Also, there is another problem, but can you see it? There is an equally strong attack taking place on the king side. This pawn on g6 is entirely hopeless, and even if Leela tried, she would not be able to cover. King e7 will immediately lead to the removal of this pawn, and Leela once again would be in trouble. Rook g8 to block the bishop's taking can get you in with this move, and again observe carefully. Stockfish would be in a much stronger position. The king is bound to castle long, but in comparison, Leela with her king sitting in the center of the board with no prospect of castling, this game can only lead to one direction. Okay, now that we have seen the what-ifs of this intriguing variation, Leela avoided what we just went through. She backed off the bishop to where he stood earlier. Stockfish went on to remove this pawn from the equation, and the follow-up question is how to deal with this knight that is under attack. Knight h5 will definitely lead to this takes with a check. And once the king is forced out to collect him, nothing else but this check with rook f1 or even one better, you can accomplish this with castles. Whatever Leela tries, some things would need to disappear. King g8 will drop this pawn, and next is either the rook or knight. You cannot save the knight and rook, but I'm not sure this knight is at all savable whatever you do. With this picture in mind, even though Stockfish looks to somehow lag behind, the engine has a tremendously strong initiative. Leela is by no means an amateur type of engine and well deserves her spot in the superfinal. Able to see well beyond any human, she was able to calculate this specific line of play and variation. With her trying this avenue of play, which is in fact the best move to go for, check out this position and you tell me if this is not complete madness on the board. There are two knights on offer, and what Stockfish has planned will escape the most trained human eye. In the end, Stockfish calculated best to get rid of the knight from f6, and when this pawn dropped, at least we can calculate this knight on d7 was the time being was safe and could not be taken. With this pawn now finding the fourth, Leela jumped the knight into this central outpost. And you might have guessed it right here. Stockfish here advanced this pawn to the fifth. The pawn on e6 came flying off. And with now finally Stockfish going long, Leela goes on to get rid of yet another pawn. It was this pawn in the very center. Any ideas how Stockfish pushed on and try and make things work in his favor? The engine appears to blunder here. Let us see the move and then we might be able to decide whether this can qualify as a blunder. Stockfish calculated best to get rid of this pawn from the sixth, and deliberately allows this lethal type of attack to appear. With the knight on e5 having the back of this bishop, why had Stockfish allowed this vicious attack to unfold against him? This is the very reason why so many of us love to look at chess engine games. Things are not even when we think the continuation is so straightforward. As soon as this picture materialized, Stockfish backs off the queen to the very first, and with this rook now coming off, Stockfish uses the queen to capture. And yet miraculously, this is not what we saw. This bishop was eventually taken using the king, and Leela tries to minimize the problem on her king side. She handed over the knight to the bishop, but with this brand new picture emerging, it appears Leela is the one in the driver's seat. She has a plethora of pawns, but this is a visual problem. Though all these pawns look very strong, Stockfish is only a pawn behind, but if we also add all the other pieces into the equation, we have the two queens, a bishop each, but it is Stockfish the engine that is a full exchange down. However, the biggest problem in the game, or the biggest obstacle, rests with the very position of this pawn on g6. This pawn is the mother of all headaches. Ignore for the time being this pawn on d5 is another easy target, but should Stockfish go for him? First things first, right after this queen repositioning, and this was to stop the queen's access into h3, Stockfish was not going to budge. The engine still applied this queen move, and what is looking to do next is to penetrate using this outpost on h5. One move that makes sense is to try this rook move because it blocks the access into h5. What this move does not do, however, is not to stop the taking on d5. If you take this pawn away from the game, rook f8, or even rook e8, is not going to do much. Can you see what needs to be done here? Take with a check, and when the knight drops, this is what you are looking to do. Queen g7 to try and entice the queens to come off is not going to work. Why not? Stockfish is most likely going to take off this pawn. And when the queen moves in again, even if the queens come off, what side would you like to have and why? The most effective move to pursue would be to opt for this bishop repositioning. Once the bishop finds this terrific outpost, the rook on e5 is automatically paralyzed. Should this rook move out, the game would automatically end with a checkmate. Everything would be possible because of this pawn that is parked on g6. He is so powerful, and this is why Stockfish, though appears to be in a weaker position, what we are seeing is exactly the opposite. The last move we looked at was this queen repositioning right into f3. Leela calculated that even with the queen on f3, Stockfish is simply unable to enforce a checkmate. Even if h5 is taken, a check from the corner will result to the king moving west, and if there is a rook check from e1, Leela would be able to move her king into d7 and then the game would continue without really Stockfish having a great positional advantage. So let us see what happened after queen f3 and how Leela sought to minimize any damage against her. Leela is somewhat restricted, but with this pawn on d5 is it possible that this further attack on the knight will have an impact? It is highly unlikely this attack would have a punch. Jumping the knight into the fifth is key, because as things stand, we do have a two-pronged attack. One is an attack on b6 with the idea to enforce a quite nasty fork. The second one is here on f6. Let us bypass this specific line. Leela, without delay, lifts the rook to the seventh. And with this pawn finally departing, how would you take and why? If you take with the queen, you would have blown it big time. Why? After king f8, the threat is minimized and Leela would be able to escape. She might not be able to win, but she would not be losing either. So with Stockfish eliminating this pawn with the knight, Leela need not worry about this pawn on b6. He would still come off, but you no longer are looking at a fork. Leela here wanted to find a way to protect this pawn on f6, and with her trying this queen repositioning, this knight here in the center of the board is somewhat paralyzed. If you take on b6, there is this brilliant and effective queen repositioning. There is only one way out here, but can you see it? It has to be this queen move to the rim. Rook e7 can lead to this knight to jump into d7. But far can this move get you? This check here forces the bishop back to block it, but can you see how Leela can make progress? It is here with this check. Take, 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 and take with a check will force the king to the second, and with Leela free to take this pawn with another check, the mate in one is never going to materialize. Why not? Is because right after the king is flashed out, Leela has the option to either remove this pawn or she can carry on with the checks and this king goes nowhere. King f2 and you can either swap the queens or do anything you like here. Coming back to the game, after queen e6, Stockfish came up with the most human move and having chosen to attack the queen, queen d7, led to this way forward. It looks risky, but if Stockfish goes for it then it should look sound. This rook moved to into f the 1st of May look iffy, but if you try this takes on f6. After takes, and takes, and if you take, get rid of this rook with a check. And now there is a big difference in how you take here. If you use the king, this would spell disaster. Even if we don't have the time to run into this line any deeper, we would have to make time. With the king situated on e1, this check is now forcing. Get the queens to come off. And I'm not sure how this position could be equal. This pawn on g6 is a sitting duck and the bishop would be no match to an otherwise stronger rook. There is another variation which we might want to skip. Let us see what happened after this room repositioning. With this pawn on a4 fully exposed, Leela gave him no chance of survival. She got rid of him and immediately after, this was how Stockfish played it. Stockfish is able to calculate that if a corner check materializes, the bishop would be in time to block everything and this queen in the corner would be extremely badly positioned. So how the game continued here was as follows. Leela lifted the rook to the 6th. Stockfish finally squeezes in this timely check. And with the king making his west to the only legal square. What follows next is an absolute classic. When Stockfish sees something, the engine would never hold back. Maybe is also pointing out at the stage that engines blunder just like humans do. They don't blunder with the same frequency, but we do get to see these blunders throughout every single division or league if you like. Let's witness the move first and then we can try and work out if Stockfish blunders here. Is there anyone who is watching here able to offer an insight? This is the move the engine executed. It looks insane, but can you make out or even suggest how this game moves on in at least the next few moves? If Leela had a voice, and this is something the engine will have in a couple of years' time, she would probably be happy to see this Stockfish initiative. This bishop move to the 6th is threatening a mate in one move, but with Leela coming in with this check, King c1 instantly resulted to this bishop to drop, and when the queen removed the bishop, this check was about to cause havoc. King d8 does not work as there is a mate in one. With Leela turning the king closer to the queen, the rook made his way into the corner, and what we are witnessing here is a mate in just one move. Stockfish evaluates this very position at a plus score of 7.31 and Leela is looking at this as a plus score of only 0.9. In short, one is a significant figure and the other actually quite the opposite. This is another big problem with the evaluations from engines. What engine is correct and how can we know? It is very difficult to know at this stage, and we might need to take this all the way before we can say with any degree of certainty. With the mate in one on her doorstep, there is only one move that stops it. Maybe this is what Leela was looking at. The engine saw no big danger, and as soon as this push to f5 was made, Stockfish came up with a killer response. It went for this push to g4, and with this pawn coming off, Stockfish redirects the queen here and is looking to sneak in with another blow from the back rank. Rook d7 to keep control of d8 resulted now to this queen repositioning, and just to put things in perspective, let's us just bring up Stockfish's evaluation with the last two moves or so. With g4, it went up to 12.39 from 7.31, and when the queen sneaked into g5, the eval jumped to 28.85. The move after that, and when the queen repositioned into the adjacent square, Stockfish was zeroing in very fast. That 28.85 figure had now reached 199.01. Leela here sought to trade the queens in, and having tried this way to swap them, the engine was hit by another very significant blow. Can you spot the move of the day, and if so, where is it? Has anyone was able to spot this check using the rook? This is exactly how Stockfish did. At this stage, there is only way to capture. If you do this with the king, this incoming check would also end the game, and that would be it. With Leela having no option but to capture using the queen, this rook on e6 also fell, and because of the check, as soon as the king was forced west, this rook was up next. However, get rid of the rook and there is price to pay. Once you afford the queen to check in this way, after the king is ejected to the second, not only this knight bites the dust, but now we have a game changer. Stockfish will no longer be able to beat Leela because the engine would not have enough material. For this very reason, when the king was forced into f8, this rook on d7 was not removed, but Stockfish had worked out another line, which was much deeper and much more intriguing. It came in with this check, and with the king now forced to the other side, Stockfish finally delivers this quite nasty fork. King g7, and Stockfish is beginning to toy with Leela. This is why we love witnessing this game. No move is certain until it is being played. Not every single move is a brilliancy, but for sure this version of Stockfish simply rocks. You can easily remove the rook, but this would be a huge blunder because Leela will be able to strike back and go for exactly the same moves as earlier and end everything with a dead draw. However, when it came to this very position, Stockfish continued with the checks, and quite rightly. This is where the king came. If you place him at the back rank, this check will appear, and with the king now forced west, what would this follow-up check do? King e7 not only drops the queen, but the game will be over in a handful of moves. For this reason, the king found the 6th. The rook was then disappeared, and there is an additional problem here. Why can't Leela take this knight? If she does, this check will end things too. Take. taken this pawn will promote to a brand new queen. So, for this very reason, when the rook departed, Leela got rid of this pawn first. And you are hardly going to guess how Stockfish handles the situation. And let me tell you this. As soon as the rook came tumbling down, Stockfish had locked in a force mate in 93 plies. It is important to note when these mates lock in because we can also check if the mate is delivered in 93 plies or if you like in 46 moves. If Leela finds the best moves, then there should be at least 46 additional moves. We know this did not happen. Right after this pawn was taken with a check, Stockfish had a trap in place. If the knight goes, this would be the idea and the game ends in a handful of moves. For this reason, this is how Leela played it. And now via this brand new queen repositioning, Leela gets her king to find the sixth. Stockfish at this stage picks up this pawn with yet another check. Leela gets her king to find the rim. And now via this knight repositioning, Leela get her own queen to reposition here. This game rise to something new. Stockfish came up with this forcing move to get the queens to come off. And yet this is where we experience another atypical blunder. Leela for some reason does not take the queen, but this is the move she opts for. There is no need just yet to get rid of the queen because there is another intermediate move that makes life easier. Stockfish went on to deliver this check. And with the king now finding the rim, the queen eventually dropped, and a mate was now established in just 13 plies. How the game progressed would be a puzzle in its own right for many humans. In the meantime, it might be best to come back to this very position to elaborate on something we said earlier. Right after this king moved to h6, which is move 40 in the game, as soon as the rook was eliminated, according to the official site, a mate in 93 plies or 46 moves was detected by Stockfish. This we know has been a rather incorrect calculation and we shall prove why. King g6 led to the removal of this pawn with another check. And instantly, that checkmate figure changed to only a mate ply of 77. King h7 and queen f4 reduced the plies to 71 and 2 moves after. That mate was further reduced to 55 plies. Let me stop here for just 1 second. We can do this differently. Why not bring up the official website as the game unfolded and for you to see how things went? Okay, here we have it. Queen takes rook is where the mate in 93 plies was locked in. From this point on you can see for yourselves. King takes was followed by this takes, and with the king backing off, after this queen move that mate in plies had reduced to 71. Is Leela's evaluation here more realistic? It's a hard question to answer. King g6 and this takes check reduced the mate by 1 move, but after king h6, and this knight jump, check out that mate reducing to only 55 plies. What Stockfish displays here cannot be accurate, but we might be wrong. Moving on, after queen e8, pay attention to how that mate figure reduces. Having witnessed the big blunder of the day here, Leela does not take but opts for a king move. And of course, because of this, that mate has now moved to just 15 or 7.5 moves. From this point everything looks fine. nh3 check. And king h4 led to the queen to finally come off. And it doesn't matter if this knight is removed or not. There is no human on the planet who is not going to eliminate him. With Leela choosing this path, this incoming check led to the king to move southwest. Another check followed. And with the king making his way east, knight g5 and Leela stays put with the king. She went for this pawn move. Stockfish delivers this check. And with the king now finding the second, the checkmate in 1 was now seconds away. In with a check, the king found the very edge. And with this spectacular knight move, what a better way to checkmate the opposing king. What we have seen today was the shortest game in the Superfinal, but before we stick out our neck, let us first run a quick check. Let's bring up all the games and check them out together. I hope you can see what column does what. This is the column we are looking for, the one with the moves. Let us now search shortest decisive game to confirm. There are 10 pages to go through, so let's do this fast. Keep a close eye on this game of round 10, which is just 54 moves long. Page 2 game 13 is short, but it was drawn. Page 3 there is nothing here. Page 4. Nothing here that qualifies. Page 5. Again nothing of interest. Page 6. There is nothing here. Page 7. Nothing here either. Page 8 that comprises of these games, and again there is nothing here. Page 9 is again the same story. And finally, with now looking at the last page, the shortest one is the one of round 85. And looking at the rest, we have now looked at all 100 Superfinal games. Therefore, we are now able to confirm, the game we covered was the shortest encounter in this season's Superfinal. Looking at this game in particular, can provide many of us some invaluable lessons. We cannot learn by imitating, but just like in any other Superfinal game, there are some deep tactics in place. If you are able to take away with you just a few, then it would have been mission accomplished. In this game of round 10, Stockfish had already started with some material advantage from the very opening, and slowly and gradually, the engine increased its superiority and got there in the end, making in fact things look so simple. Do not be fooled. Nothing is simple in chess, and even though Stockfish had given up or offered multiple pieces at different stages of the game, it took what it took to make a relatively easy meal out of Leela. And this was the game today. We sincerely hope you have enjoyed it, and look very forward to seeing you again. God bless and take care.